If still not exactly sophisticated, Depeche Mode now dealt with adult themes of sex, insecurity, alienation, and power. Just how far they'd come was obvious when Mute released Depeche Mode, the singles 81 to 85. The album reached number 6 in Britain and received a mixed critical reaction. Few, however, could fail to acknowledge Depeche Mode's mastery of the 3-minute pop format and their determination to do something new within its confines. The collection included 2 new tracks, the brooding Shake the Disease and the pacey It's Called a Heart. Neither gave any real indication of the direction Depeche Mode were going to go in next, but the album seemed to draw a line under the first phase of their career, right down the middle of the decade. Their next release, Black Celebration, was recorded in one continuous, and at times tortuous, stretch in London and Berlin. The tensions weren't helped by the increasingly different lifestyles of the band. Dave Gahan had married his girlfriend Joanne and was trying hard to be a responsible adult, while Andy Fletcher had moved in with his partner and a large number of yucca plants. Alan Wilder and Martin Gore, though, were drinking and smoking dope continually through the sessions, which were masterminded once again by Daniel Miller and Gareth Jones. However, the stressful atmosphere was to result in what is, to many, still the classic Depeche Mode album. Claustrophobic, moody, simultaneously anthemic and introspective, Black Celebration was also Depeche Mode's most collaborative effort to date. All 4 members contributed, programming samplers and finding new sounds, while Daniel Miller found himself almost surplus to requirements, as the band had their own strong ideas of the direction the record should take. The album also saw more use of guitars than before, though often heavily treated, distorted, sampled, and overlaid. The first single, Stripped, was based around the sound of a revving motorcycle engine, overlaid with sampled fireworks, car ignition noises, bass and vocals. Lyrically, Gore cited his influences as European writers such as Camus, Kafka and Brecht, although by the time of Black Celebration's release in March 1986, he and Christina had left Berlin for London. Nevertheless, the sexual, existential themes of Some Great Reward persisted, as did the relentless industrial groove. Gore sang on the album's second single, A Question of Lust, which mixed Kurt Weill-style cabaret song with moody electropop. It peaked at number 28, yet the band were now selling out arena shows in Britain, while in America and Germany they were playing in stadiums. Their biggest yet, the 1986 tour, was also the time when Depeche Mode really began to party hard. Martin Gore led from the front, but the supposedly settled and happily married Dave Gahan definitely brought up the rear. Depeche Mode were now a major rock band, and embarking on the lifestyle that went with the territory.
Every single we make a video for, just to promote the single, really.
Following a third single from Black Celebration, A Question of Time, Depeche Mode felt that they'd gone as far as they could in their current direction. The album marked the peak of their experiments in industrial sampling, and now they preferred to move on rather than risk repeating themselves. Daniel Miller, who had co-produced all their albums so far, had seen on Black Celebration that his boys were now more than capable of looking after themselves, and so took a back seat to concentrate on his business as a record company boss. They also decided not to use Gareth Jones on the new sessions, and instead hired Tears for Fears producer Dave Bascombe. His brief was simple: to go for a warmer, more organic feel, even embracing traditional rock structures while still maintaining the Depeche Mode sound. The band continued to sample sounds from the city they recorded in this case Paris, but they also jammed together on guitars and live drums in order to work in a more natural, spontaneous fashion. The resulting album, Music for the Masses, also saw Alan Wilder exerting more influence than ever before, painstakingly programming, mixing and layering the sounds and beats until they were absolutely perfect. This latest release was preceded by a single, Strangelove, in April 1987. A bridge between the sound of Black Celebration and the new release, the band were reportedly unhappy with the mix of this brooding hymn to sexual experimentation, re-recording it for the final album version. The video was shot by the noted Dutch photographer Anton Corbijn, who had also directed the promo for A Question of Time. Black and white, moody and artistic, Corbijn's videos would be largely responsible for creating Depeche Mode's new, mature image as they moved away from leather fetishism and metal bashing. They were now a serious, modern, electronic rock band, equally at home in the stadium concert or on the dance floor. The title of Music for the Masses, while supposedly an ironic reference to their eternal cult appeal, was in fact an appropriate name for an album of anthemic, knowing numbers that effortlessly steamrolled the listener into grateful submission. The LP's second single, Never Let Me Down Again, was a case in point. With its sweeping orchestral groove and Led Zeppelin-inspired drum sound, it was the closest they'd come to a rock song. Yet it remained streamlined and without an inch of excess flap. The album also featured the reptilian driving song Behind the Wheel, the powerful, haunting Little 15, and the Wagnerian instrumental Pimpf. The accompanying live shows had an appropriately totalitarian feel, with stage sets designed like a Roman amphitheatre, draped with huge flags bearing ominous, ambiguous symbols. Huge orange megaphones blared out at the crowd from the top of the speaker stacks as the band toured arenas and stadiums in Europe and America, playing 101 concerts between the 22nd of October 1987 and the 18th of June 1988. For the final American leg of the tour, the band hired legendary filmmaker D.A. Pennebaker, most famous for his 1967 Bob Dylan documentary Don't Look Back, to capture the spectacle in the musical road movie 101. Pennebaker wasn't a fan of Depeche Mode's music, yet he understood the impact they had on their fans, the power of their live show, and the unsettling experience of an English band on a huge American tour, cocooned in a bubble of drink, drugs, boredom, adulation, and routine. The film contained moments of deadpan, Spinal Tap-like hilarity, as well as showing the financial realities behind the glamour. It was appropriate then that a live version of Everything Counts should be released as a single from the soundtrack album in February 1989. The film showed Depeche Mode taking on America with everything they had, hungry for the prize, taking a gamble and winning. But the tour also saw the levels of rock and roll excess increasing, with Dave Gahan beginning to seriously slip off the wagon. While still trying to pretend that his marriage was working out, the singer gave in to temptation every night, whether to the endless supply of willing groupies or to cocaine. Always slightly out of place in front of the huge, oppressive stage sets, wiggling his bum in his tight white jeans and cut-off jacket, Gahan was beginning to worry that he wasn't living up to the band's image. Maybe, he thought, it was time to start acting like a real live rock star should. There aren't any more rock and roll people anymore, Gahan said in 1988. People that do it because they really believe in it. Dave Gahan was about to take it upon himself to fill that gap with devastating consequences.
In fact, what's quite exciting in England at the moment is all this house music, which is really popular, and that it comes straight from what we've been doing really in the last 7 or 8. In fact, journalists are shocked when they ask all these bands who they like and who they listen to, and they say us and say, what, you know.
Dave Bascombe was unavailable to work on the band's next album, Violator, and so Depeche Mode contacted Mark Flood Ellis, an engineer and producer long associated with Mute Records and a Depeche Mode fan of long standing. When he was finally able to work with the group, they clicked immediately. Flood and Alan Wilder in particular forming a close working relationship in the studio. In contrast to previous albums, when Martin Gore would arrive with a set of nearly complete demos, the songs on Violator were allowed to develop organically, often starting with basic guitar tracks. In effect, Depeche Mode were coming around to a traditional rock and roll way of making music, having previously been manipulators of sound in the studio, the reverse of the path most bands follow. They allowed themselves to experiment with different sounds and techniques, jamming together as on Music for the Masses, but going one step further towards a looser, more relaxed and spontaneous way of working. This may have been influenced by the fact that Milan, where the album was partly recorded, had a dynamic club culture which the band took full advantage of. Violator was recorded on the cusp of the decade, at the point where the 80s acid house boom was just beginning to go mainstream, mutating into the musical force that would dominate the 1990s techno. Many house and techno DJs and musicians saw Depeche Mode as a pivotal influence, although the band themselves were ambivalent about their role. They saw themselves as songwriters who made forward-looking electronic music that happened to be danceable, but they were not in the business of churning out anonymous dance records. Ironically, just as techno was exploding, with major players like Derek May bigging up the Depeche Mode back catalogue, the band were moving more towards guitars, traditional structures and a slower, almost bluesy feel, typified by tracks like Personal Jesus. Gore was returning to his glam rock roots, while Dave Gahan grew his hair in an attempt to be taken more seriously as a frontman. Violator opens with the chilling World in My Eyes, before the seductive, cinematic Sweetest Perfection allows a shaft of light to penetrate the gloom. Halo and Policy of Truth make for stomping electro-funk, while Enjoy the Silence most showed the influence of the club scene and the propulsive rush of ecstasy. The album was finished off in Denmark, and it was here that Andy Fletcher began to show the first signs of a crippling hypochondriac depression. Often seen as the solid, stable median between the twin poles of Dave Gahan and Martin Gore, Fletcher's bluff Essex attitude concealed a sensitive and highly strung individual. 5 years previously, Fletcher's sister had died of stomach cancer while still in her mid-20s, and the pressure of being in a globally successful band had not allowed him the time or space to grieve properly. Finally, all the pent-up emotion began to manifest itself in anxiety attacks and imaginary illnesses, complete with very real, if psychosomatic, physical pain. He was prescribed medication, but the drugs only disguised the problem, making him even more hyperactive, nervous and irritable than usual, and heightening the growing tension between him and Alan Wilder. Wilder had never fully appreciated Fletcher's abstract role in the band, and increasingly saw the studio as his own private domain. He resented what he saw as Fletcher's unnecessary and ill-informed interjections. At the same time, Dave Gahan's marriage was beginning to disintegrate, and he had embarked on an affair with the band's American publicist, Teresa Conway. It was in this vulnerable state that the band set out on another riotous, ecstasy-fueled world tour. The Anton Corbijn designed stage set was at once both awe-inspiring and emotionally intimate, incorporating giant screens which heightened Violator's cinematic feel. Depeche Mode sold out a 31-date stadium tour of America within hours of tickets going on sale. The hedonism too reached an unprecedented scale, with Gahan and his new partner Teresa Conway now wholeheartedly indulging in cocaine and ecstasy-inspired debauchery. Gore's legendary drinking also continued unabated, while Fletcher's fragile mental state and the conflict between him and Alan Wilder bubbled just below the surface. Every night was a party, and the band convinced themselves that they were still having fun. But something had to give.
It's not a cool thing to be an addict. It's not, you're a slave to it, and it's taken everything away from me that I love.